Earlier, we talked about how important AKL is, but the question is, how do we actually find these words in real texts? Here's one way. I asked ChatGPT to scan this passage and pull out the AKL words. On the next slide, you can see the response. The AI neatly categorized the words. For example, nouns like question, method, interaction, verbs like submit, facilitate, increase, and so on and so forth. And then, when we highlight these words in the passage itself, you can see the density of AKL vocabulary in action. So, by combining AI tools with our own critical reading, we get a very clear picture of how academic language is built. I know I've mentioned the ALG paper several times, and that's because I genuinely admire it. This study, Learning to Find Answers to Questions on the Web, is a wonderful example of how research can be both rigorous and influential. And just so you're clear, whenever I talk about the ALG paper, this is the one I mean. It's available for you to download on the platform, and I sincerely encourage you to read it carefully. Also, please keep in mind we'll be using many examples from ALG in just a moment. That's how central and illustrative this paper is. It's the kind of study that can really shape the way you think about academic writing and research. Alright, let's do a little practice with Move 1, setting up the research landscape. Here's a short passage, and your task is to spot the functional phrases that emphasize importance. Take a moment to scan through it. On the next slide, you can see how GPT-5 has already annotated these phrases for you. For instance, notice how words like many, every day, or increasing number highlight quantity and frequency, while specifically marks focus. These markers signal importance and set up the research landscape. After Move 1 sets up the importance of the field, Move 2 establishes the niche, showing what the problem or gap is. In this passage from the ALG paper, notice how the authors highlight a limitation. Search engines treat questions as simple keyword lists, which means the best answers might not rank highly. This contrast signals the niche, the problem that their research will step in to address. Now that we've established the niche in Move 2, let's move on to Move 3, which is about occupying the niche. Let's consider a simple question. What is a hard disk? At first glance, search engines might return company product pages, which aren't necessarily the best sources. Instead, we want tutorials or glossaries that explain the concept more clearly. For example, a good answer might be hard disk, one or more rigid magnetic disks rotating about a central axle. Notice how this connects back to the problem we identified earlier. Then, in Step 4, we see how the system transforms the original question into a query hard disk near used to. Finally, Step 5 shows how requiring the phrase used to can bias search engines toward better ranked, more precise documents. This illustrates how Move 3 works in practice, not only posing the problem but also actively filling the gap. So far, we've been focusing on structure, the moves and sentence patterns that shape an effective introduction. We saw how Move 1 sets up the landscape, Move 2 carves out a niche, and Move 3 occupies that niche. Structure gives your writing logic and flow. But structure alone isn't enough. We also need the right vocabulary. And that's where functional phrases and academic keywords come in. Let's look at how these functional phrases actually appear in real writing. Here, we're back to the ALG paper, yes, the one I keep saying I love. See how it uses phrases like many natural language questions, for example, however, probably not, but rather. These are all functional moves, but they're also tied to academic keywords. Up to this point, we've talked about how to structure an introduction and how to use the right kinds of words, especially academic keywords and functional phrases. But good writing isn't just about logic and vocabulary. It's also about style. Style makes your sentences clear, elegant, and persuasive. To help us work on this, I'd like to bring in a very practical resource: The Art of Styling Sentences, 20 Patterns for Success. In this next activity, we'll look at our passage again, but this time we'll analyze it for sentence patterns. Let's try this together. Look at this first sentence. Consider the question, what is a hard disk? This is an imperative sentence. It uses pattern 7, beginning with a verb in command form. That's one way writers guide the reader's attention directly. Now, the next sentence, the best documents for this query are probably not, but rather. This is an example of pattern 1, compound with contrasting elements, not, but rather. Notice how this pattern sets up a contrast very clearly. Both of these are excellent ways to give shape and rhythm to your introduction. If we look across the ALG paper, these are the sentence patterns that appear most frequently. Coordination, subordination, introductory adverbs or prepositional phrases, parentheticals, passive voice, appositives, relative clauses, and semicolon structures. Why is this important? Because when you're writing your own introductions, you can actually choose from these patterns to make your sentences more stylish and effective. We've looked at structure, vocabulary, and even at how to style sentences so they sound polished and academic. Now, there's still one final piece that ties everything together, and that's cohesion. Take a look at this passage again. Notice how words like question, search, services, information, and interaction appear and reappear, almost like echoes. These repetitions aren't accidental. They create lexical chains that guide the reader and reinforce the main themes. But let's not forget, this class is also about practical tools. And one of the most powerful tools available to us now is AI. Instead of just reading a model paper, we can ask AI to break it down for us. What's the input? What's the output? What are the conditions or data sets? In this way, AI doesn't replace your work. It strengthens it, helping you see writing patterns more clearly. So, as we come to the end of this course, let's take a step back and look at the big picture. What we've been doing is learning how to write introductions that actually work, introductions that don't just explain background but really sell your research. Because in academic writing, the introduction is your sales pitch. If you lose your reader there, you've lost them for the whole paper. Now, how do we get there? We started by imitating model papers, carefully watching the moves they make, how they set up a problem, how they identify the gap, and how they present their solution. Then we moved into the language itself. We talked about functional phrases, those little words and expressions like many, however, for example, may, might. They may look simple, but they're the glue that holds academic arguments together. After that, we looked at styling sentences. Here, the point was to move beyond just correct English and into elegant English. Using different sentence patterns, compound, complex, imperative, passive, appositive, you can control rhythm and emphasis. We also looked at academic vocabulary and cohesion. Academic writing sticks to a fairly stable set of words, and good writers build chains of meaning, question, search, answer. Finally, we brought AI into the picture. Instead of treating AI as just a tool to generate text, we used it to analyze model papers, to spot functional phrases, to identify inputs and outputs, to map the structure of an introduction. This way, AI becomes a learning partner, helping you see patterns that you can then apply in your own drafts.